Here's a creatively rewritten translation of the provided text, aiming for clarity, smoothness, and a touch of elaboration within the specified constraints. It seemed like a typical family portrait at first glance, but a closer look revealed a child standing by the window. The photograph arrived at Emma Wilson's restoration studio on a heavy, humid morning in late August. It was nestled in a cardboard box filled with items from an estate sale. The seller, an antique dealer from Charleston, South Carolina, had included a brief note, which he discovered during a house clearance. Asterisk, thought you might find it interesting. Asterisk, Emma carefully extracted the photograph from its protective wrapping. The image was mounted on thick cardboard, a common practice for studio portraiture in the 1870s, though this particular photograph appeared to have been taken in a private home rather than a professional studio. Its condition was remarkable. The print still possessed its original sepia tones with minimal fading, a testament to its careful preservation. The composition was conventional for the time, a prosperous white family formally arranged in their parlor. The father sat in an upholstered chair at the center, his posture stiff and proper, in that Victorian way, one hand resting firmly on a carved wooden armrest. He looked to be in his mid-40s, sporting a full beard and the stern expression often encouraged by photographers of the period to compensate for the long exposure times required by the cameras. His wife stood beside him, her hand placed delicately on his shoulder in a traditional gesture that signified marital unity. 3 children completed the central arrangement, 2 girls in matching white dresses, each with ribbons in her hair, appearing to be around 8 and 10 years old, and a boy, about 12, in a dark suit, positioned slightly apart from his sisters. The parlor itself spoke volumes about the family's wealth. Heavy curtains framed tall windows, elaborate wallpaper adorned the walls, and expensive, ornate furniture filled the visible space. A piano was partially visible in the background, along with framed paintings and various decorative objects displayed on side tables. Emma initiated her standard documentation process, noting the photographer's mark faintly embossed on the backing. Thompson and Associates, Charleston, South Carolina. She photographed the entire image with her high-resolution camera, preparing to begin the digital restoration. As she reviewed the initial scans on her monitor, carefully adjusting the contrast to reveal details obscured by age, something in the background caught her eye near one of the windows. A figure stood there, partially hidden by the heavy curtain. A child, much younger than the 3 in the foreground, perhaps only 6 or 7 years old. The child's clothing was noticeably different, simple and made of plain fabric, lacking any of the elaborate styling of the family's garments, and the child was black. Emma increased the magnification, studying the small figure more closely. Emma spent the entire morning meticulously examining every detail of the photograph, her fascination growing with each passing minute. The child near the window was clearly visible once you knew where to look, but positioned in such a way that a casual observer might easily overlook the figure altogether. Standing in shadow, partially obscured by the edge of the curtain, it was almost as if the child had been deliberately placed there to be both present and invisible. The child's posture differed significantly from that of the posed family in the foreground. While the white family members held carefully arranged positions, shoulders back, faces directed towards the camera, the child appeared caught mid-motion, as if turned towards the window or perhaps attempting to move away from the frame altogether. The simple dress or shirt the child wore was light in color but plain, utterly devoid of the ornamentation that adorned even the youngest of the white children's clothing. Emma called her colleague Marcus, a history professor at Emory University, who had assisted her with previous research projects involving Civil War-era photography. "I need your expertise on something," she said as soon as he answered the phone. "I've got an 1875 photograph from Charleston, and there's something about it that's raising a lot of questions." Marcus arrived that afternoon, his curiosity piqued as he examined the image on Emma's large monitor. She showed him the full composition first, then zoomed in on the figure standing by the window. "That's not uncommon for the period," Marcus said slowly, his academic tone barely concealing a hint of discomfort. "Servants, especially black servants, sometimes appear in the backgrounds of family portraits, usually unintentionally. They were part of the household environment, so they ended up in the frame. But this is 1875, Emma pointed out, a full 10 years after the end of slavery. Would a black child still be working as a servant in a white household? Absolutely. The end of slavery didn't magically eliminate black domestic labor. Many formerly enslaved people had no choice but to continue working for their former owners, albeit under different arrangements. This applied to both adults and children. The economic system simply didn't transform overnight. Marcus leaned closer to the screen, studying the child's features and positioning with intense scrutiny. But there's something about this particular image that's uniquely interesting. The way the child is positioned, it's ambiguous, isn't it? Not fully excluded from the family grouping, yet certainly not included either. And look at the age. Emma had already noticed this. The child appeared younger than the three white children, but not dramatically so. Perhaps 6 years old, occupying a space that was neither entirely inside nor entirely outside the formal family portrait. I need to find out who this family was, Emma said, her determination growing. Identifying the family proved surprisingly straightforward. The photographer's mark led her directly to Thompson and Associates, a well-documented Charleston photography studio that had operated from 1868 to 1889. The studio had meticulously kept client records, and fortunately, many of these had been preserved by the Charleston Historical Society. Marcus undertook the trip to Charleston, spending 2 full days immersed in the Historical Society's archives. He returned laden with photocopies of ledgers, city directories, and census records. The family's name is Mitchell, he announced, spreading the documents across Emma's work table. William Mitchell, age 46, in 1875, his wife, Catherine, age 42, children Robert, age 12, Eleanor, age 10, and Alice, age 8. The photograph matches perfectly. 3 children, right ages, right time period. The census record listed William Mitchell's occupation as a merchant and landowner. Property records revealed that he owned a large house on Meeting Street, in Charleston's most prestigious neighborhood, as well as several parcels of land outside the city. Here's where it gets even more interesting, Marcus continued, pulling out yet another document. Mitchell owned a rice plantation about 30 miles from Charleston. He had owned it before the war and continued to operate it afterward, though, of course, without enslaved labor. The 1870 census lists 42 people working on the property, all identified as laborers or farm workers. Emma carefully studied the property records. The plantation house had burned down in 1879, and the land had eventually been sold off in the 1890s, after Mitchell's death. The Meeting Street house in Charleston had remained in the family until the 1920s, when it was converted into apartments and, finally, demolished in the 1960s. So, the photograph was taken in the Charleston house, Emma concluded. 10 years after the war ended. This child in the background, do we have any idea who she was? Marcus shook his head slowly. That's going to be much harder to determine. Domestic servants usually weren't listed in census records, unless they lived in the household full-time, and even then, they might simply be counted as domestic servant with no name attached. Emma enhanced the image once more, meticulously studying the child's face. Her features were delicate, and her expression seemed uncertain, almost wary. She looked scared. Or, she was probably told to stand still and be quiet while the photograph was taken. These exposures took several minutes. Everyone had to remain motionless, including anyone in the background. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to this child's presence in the photograph, something that explained the ambiguous positioning, neither fully visible nor completely hidden. The breakthrough came from a completely unexpected source. Emma had posted a query on a genealogy forum specializing in South Carolina families, including a carefully cropped version of the photograph that showed only the background figure. She described her as an unidentified child from an 1875 Charleston household and asked if anyone recognized patterns that might aid in her identification. A woman named Virginia responded within 3 days. Virginia was a genealogist who specialized in tracing African-American family histories through the fragmented records of the Reconstruction era. She had encountered similar photographs before, Images where black children appeared in the backgrounds of white family portraits in ways that seemed deliberately ambiguous. These children, Virginia wrote, were often the biological offspring of the white men in the photographs, the children of enslaved women who had been forced into relationships with their enslavers. After emancipation, some of these children remained in the households, occupying an impossible position, neither fully family nor fully servant, acknowledged, yet not claimed. The word struck Emma like a physical blow. She looked at the photograph again, armed with this new understanding. The child's positioning near the window suddenly seemed less like mere coincidence and more like a carefully orchestrated staging, present enough to be documented, yet distant enough to be easily deniable. Virginia agreed to assist with the research. She began by meticulously searching through Freedmen's Bureau records, which had documented formerly enslaved people in the years immediately following the Civil War. These records often included family structures, relationships, and employment arrangements. In the Charleston Freedmen's Bureau records from 1865 to 1868, Virginia discovered references to the Mitchell plantation. Among the list of people who had been enslaved, there was a woman named Sarah, age 28 in 1865, listed with 3 children, Thomas, age 9, Hannah, age 7, and Rachel, age 3. Look at the dates, Virginia emphasized during a phone call with Emma and Marcus. If Rachel was 3 in 1865, she would have been born in 1862, during slavery, when William Mitchell owned her mother. By 1875, when your photograph was taken, Rachel would have been 13. But the child in the photograph looks younger than that, Emma countered. Sarah had another child after the war, Virginia explained. I found a birth record from 1869, a daughter named Clara. No father listed, which was common for black women's birth records at the time. Clara would have been 6 years old in 1875. The silence on the phone line stretched as they all absorbed the implication. So, Clara might be the child in the photograph, Marcus said finally. And if Sarah continued working for Mitchell after emancipation, possibly at the Charleston house, then Clara grew up in that household. Present but unacknowledged, Virginia finished. The biological child of the man in the center of the photograph, half-sister to the 3 white children posed so prominently in the foreground. Finding more information about Sarah proved to be detective work of the most painstaking kind. Virginia meticulously worked through church records, employment contracts, and city directories, while Marcus diligently searched through legal documents and newspaper archives. Emma digitized and enhanced every conceivable detail of the photograph, hoping to uncover any additional clues. Sarah's life emerged in fragments. Born into slavery around 1837, she had worked in the main house of Mitchell's rice plantation, serving as a domestic servant. This proximity to the planter's family, while seemingly privileged compared to field labor, often meant vulnerability to sexual exploitation. Virginia discovered a record from 1862 in the Plantation Ledger Book, one of the few documents that had survived the plantation house fire. It noted the birth of a child to Sarah, Rachel. 3 years later, when the Civil War ended and slavery was abolished, Sarah was 28 years old, with 3 children. The Freedmen's Bureau records showed that she initially remained on the Mitchell plantation, now as a paid laborer, though the wages listed were minimal, barely enough for survival. But by 1868, Sarah's name appeared in Charleston city records. She was listed as a domestic servant at the Meeting Street address, William Mitchell's city residence. This is where it gets even more complicated, Virginia explained during one of their research sessions. After the war, many formerly enslaved women found themselves in an impossible situation. They desperately needed employment and housing, especially if they had children. Their former enslavers knew this, and often used it as leverage. Marcus found a labor contract from 1869, signed with Sarah's mark since she couldn't write. The contract bound her to work for the Mitchell household for 1 year in exchange for room, board, and a meager monthly wage. A provision at the bottom noted that her children would be housed on the property, as space permits. Clara was born in December 1869, 7 months after Sarah moved to the Charleston house. Virginia found the birth record at the city registrar's office. Clara, daughter of Sarah, no father listed. Emma studied William Mitchell's image in the photograph, his stern Victorian propriety, his hand resting possessively on the chair's arm, his wife standing dutifully beside him, his legitimate children arranged carefully in the foreground, and Clara, his unacknowledged daughter, standing by the window in the background. Emma became obsessed with understanding how this photograph came to exist in its particular form. Why had the photographer, who surely noticed Clara during the setup and exposure, chosen not to exclude her completely? Why had the Mitchell family allowed the photograph to be taken with Clara visibly present in the background? She researched Thompson and Associates, finding examples of their work in museum collections and private archives. The studio had been one of Charleston's most prestigious, catering to wealthy families who wanted to document their post-war recovery and social standing. Marcus uncovered something revealing in an 1873 newspaper article about photography practices. The piece discussed the growing popularity of home portraits rather than studio sittings, noting that photographers often face challenges with household servants appearing in the backgrounds of images. The article recommended that servants be positioned discreetly if their presence was unavoidable. Marcus read aloud, "It suggests placing them near windows or doorways, where they can be present but unobtrusive, maintaining the illusion that the family exists in a completely white domestic space, while acknowledging the reality that Black servants were integral to household functioning." This wasn't accidental positioning, Emma realized. It was a deliberate photographic convention of the era, a way of including Black domestic workers in the visual record while simultaneously rendering them symbolically invisible. But Clara's case was fundamentally different. She wasn't merely a servant who happened to be in the room. She was William Mitchell's biological daughter, living in his household, wearing simple clothes while her half-siblings wore silk and lace. Emma found examples of similar photographs from the 1870s and 1880s in Charleston, Atlanta, Richmond, and New Orleans, family portraits that included small figures in the background, children or young adults, Black, dressed plainly, positioned in doorways or near windows. Some were probably servants, but she suspected that many, like Clara, were the unacknowledged children of the white men posing proudly with their legitimate families. "It's a form of evidence and erasure at the same time," Virginia said when Emma shared her findings. These men wanted to showcase their complete households, their power, their property, their domain. But they couldn't openly acknowledge these children without causing scandal. So, the children appear as shadows, present but undefined, their relationship to the family deliberately ambiguous. The photograph became a document of a particular kind of cruelty, not the violence of slavery itself, but the continued violence of denial and partial recognition that characterized the years that followed. Tracing what happened to Clara required Virginia to employ every genealogical skill she had developed over 30 years of research. The trail was fragmented, complicated by name changes, missing records, and the systematic exclusion of Black women's stories from official documentation. Clara appeared in the 1880 census, age 11, still listed as part of the Mitchell household on Meeting Street. She was designated as a servant, despite being a child. Her mother, Sarah, was listed as a domestic servant, age 43. But by 1890, neither Clara nor Sarah appeared in the Mitchell household records. Virginia found Sarah's death certificate from 1887. She had died of pneumonia at age 50 and was buried in the Black section of a Charleston cemetery. The document listed no surviving family members. Clara's trail was harder to follow. Virginia finally found her in an 1892 city directory, listed as Clara Thompson, laundress, living on Line Street in Charleston's working-class district. She had taken a surname, Thompson, possibly the name of a man she had married, though no marriage record could be found. Taking a surname was a way of claiming an identity separate from the people who had enslaved your mother, Virginia explained. Many formerly enslaved people chose names that had meaning to them or that honored ancestors. Thompson might have been Clara's way of establishing herself as independent from the Mitchell family. The 1900 census showed Clara Thompson, aged 31, still working as a laundress, living in a boarding house with 3 other Black women. She was listed as single, though the census noted she had given birth to 2 children, both deceased. Emma's heart ached reading this. Clara had lived her entire childhood in the Mitchell household, the daughter of the wealthy merchant, the half-sister of Robert, Eleanor, and Alice. But she had been given no inheritance, no education beyond the most basic level, no acknowledgement of her father's identity. While her half-siblings grew up with private tutors, music lessons, and social connections that would secure their futures, Clara had grown up to wash other people's laundry for survival. Virginia found one more record, Clara's death certificate from 1924. She had died at age 55 of tuberculosis, a common killer of people living in poverty. The certificate listed her occupation as a domestic worker and noted that she had been buried in an unmarked grave. The contrast with William Mitchell's legacy was stark. He had died in 1891 as one of Charleston's most respected citizens, his obituary filling half a newspaper page with tributes to his business acumen and civic contributions. His funeral had been attended by hundreds. Clara had died anonymously, buried without a marker, her relationship to one of Charleston's prominent families never officially acknowledged. Virginia's next discovery changed everything. Through careful cross-referencing of death certificates, census records, and church registries, she found that Clara had not been completely alone. She had a half-sister, Rachel, Sarah's daughter, who had been born during slavery in 1862. Rachel had married in 1882 and moved to Savannah, Georgia. She had 5 children who survived to adulthood, and through them, a line of descendants that continued to the present day. Virginia contacted one of these descendants, a woman named Michelle, who lived in Atlanta and worked as a high school teacher. Michelle knew some of her family history, that her great-great-grandmother, Rachel, had been born into slavery in South Carolina, that Rachel's mother had worked for a wealthy white family after emancipation. But she didn't know about Clara, and she certainly didn't know about William Mitchell. Emma, Marcus, and Virginia drove to Atlanta to meet Michelle in person. They brought copies of all the documents they had gathered, the photograph, the census records, Sarah's labor contract, Clara's death certificate, and the evidence linking William Mitchell to Sarah and her children. Michelle studied the photograph for a long time, her expression shifting from curiosity to recognition to something akin to grief. "That's my family," she said quietly, pointing to the small figure by the window. "That's my great-great-aunt Clara. She's my blood relative as much as Rachel is." She looked at the white family in the foreground. "And that man, William Mitchell, he's my ancestor, too. His blood runs through my family line, even though he never acknowledged it, even though he positioned his daughter in the shadows, while his white children stood in the light." Marcus showed her the records of the Mitchell family's descendants. Robert Mitchell had become a lawyer. His children attended prestigious universities. Eleanor had married into another wealthy Charleston family. Alice had moved to New York and lived in comfort until her death in 1943. Clara washed laundry, Michelle said softly, while her half-siblings lived in mansions. She washed laundry and died of tuberculosis in an unmarked grave. The injustice of it hung heavy in the air between them. "What do you want to do with this information?" Emma asked gently. Michelle was quiet for a long moment, lost in thought. Then she said, "I want people to know. I want Clara's story told. She deserves to be more than a shadow in the background of someone else's family portrait." Going public with Clara's story meant confronting difficult questions about privacy, historical truth, and the ongoing impact of slavery's legacy. Emma and Marcus consulted with ethics committees, historians specializing in sensitive historical materials, and attorneys who worked on civil rights cases. The Mitchell family's descendants were still living, some in Charleston, others scattered across the country. They had built their lives on a certain understanding of their family history, and this revelation would fundamentally challenge that narrative. Marcus reached out to a genealogist who worked with the Mitchell Family Genealogical Society. The response was initially defensive, disbelief that their respected ancestor could have fathered a child with an enslaved woman, suggestions that the evidence was merely circumstantial, reminders that things were different back then. But one descendant, a woman named Catherine, who was William Mitchell's great-great-granddaughter, responded differently. She asked to see all the evidence and spent weeks meticulously reviewing the documents Virginia had gathered. I always knew something wasn't quite right about the family stories, Catherine said during a phone conversation with Emma. There were too many silences, too many topics that older relatives wouldn't discuss. And I've seen this photograph before. It's been in our family albums for generations, but no one ever mentioned the child by the window. Catherine agreed to support the public documentation of Clara's story. She provided access to additional family records, including letters and diaries that offered more context about Sarah's presence in the household. One letter, written by Catherine Mitchell to her sister in 1872, mentioned Sarah obliquely. Asterisk, the woman who works for us is competent, though William insists on particular arrangements that I find uncomfortable. I trust you understand my meaning and will not inquire further. Asterisk, it was as close to an acknowledgement as existed in the written record, a white woman recognizing, but not directly stating, that her husband had fathered a child with a black woman in their household. Emma worked with a museum curator to create an exhibition centered on the photograph. The display would feature the full image, alongside enhanced details, historical context about post-Civil War domestic labor, and documentation of both Clara's life and the Mitchell family's public history. The point isn't to shame descendants, the curator explained during planning meetings. The point is to tell the complete story, to make visible what was deliberately rendered invisible, and to honor the lives of people like Clara and Sarah, who have been erased from official family history. The exhibition opened at the Charleston Museum on a warm evening in October. Michelle attended with 15 members of her extended family, Clara's descendants, through her half-sister Rachel. Catherine came with 3 other Mitchell descendants who wanted to acknowledge this difficult part of their family history. The photograph was displayed at the center of the exhibition, enlarged to show every detail clearly. Clara's face was finally visible, no longer a barely noticed shadow, but a person with a name, a history, and descendants who claimed her. Emma had worked with a digital artist to create a companion image, Clara digitally removed from the background and repositioned in the foreground with her half-siblings, dressed in the same fine clothing, her presence fully acknowledged. It was an imagining of what might have been if she had been recognized as William Mitchell's daughter. This isn't historically accurate, the wall text explained. Asterisk, but it shows what Clara was denied, a place in the family, an inheritance, an identity beyond. She was treated as a servant, despite sharing the same father as the privileged children prominently displayed in the foreground. At the opening reception, Michelle's voice resonated with clarity and conviction as she spoke of Clara. Although Clara passed away 8 decades before my birth, I now carry the responsibility of sharing her story. She was my great-great-aunt, disowned by her father and rendered invisible by a societal structure that refused to acknowledge the existence of black children fathered by white men. But Clara's existence was undeniable. Her life mattered. And now, her descendants stand here to speak her name and reclaim her legacy. The exhibition embarked on a journey, captivating audiences in museums across Atlanta, Richmond, and Washington, D.C. Each location served as a catalyst, drawing forth more descendants who recognized their own family histories mirrored in similar photographs, children strategically positioned in doorways and windows, present yet conspicuously unacknowledged within white family portraits. Emma's commitment to restoring historical photographs remained unwavering, but her perspective had undergone a profound transformation. She meticulously scrutinized every image, paying close attention to the background details often overlooked by previous generations. This new lens revealed a multitude of similar photographs, family portraits from the 1870s and 1880s containing barely visible children or young adults lurking in the shadows, their familial connections deliberately obscured, creating an atmosphere of ambiguity. Each photograph became a poignant project of recovery, a dedicated effort to identify and honor those individuals who had been unjustly treated as invisible. Clara's photograph remained the centerpiece of this profound work, serving as a stark testament to a particular form of cruelty and a powerful reminder that uncovering historical truth requires a comprehensive examination of the entire image, not just the carefully curated parts that were intended to be seen. In 2024, Michelle took the initiative to organize a memorial service at the Charleston Cemetery, the final resting place of Sarah, who had been buried there in 1887. They erected a marker bearing Sarah's name and dates, and alongside it, a marker for Clara, whose burial site had tragically never been recorded. The markers clearly stated their relationship. Sarah, mother; Clara, daughter; ancestors remembered. Emma stood solemnly at the ceremony, cradling a framed copy of the photograph, an innocuous family portrait that had concealed a profound and painful truth. The child by the window, relegated to the margins of history, had finally been brought into the light, her story ready to be told.